Open a kitchen cabinet today. You'll find black peppercorns or cinnamon. They seem harmless, but for most of history, these scraps were treasure and treated as cargo worth killing for. Long before oil drove the 20th century, and before sugar turned islands into brutal factories, the desire for these specific seeds pulled ships across oceans. Europe's hunger for spices pushed terrestrial kingdoms to pursue maritime conquest. The strangeness of this history comes into focus when you look at the object itself. A peppercorn is a dried fruit. A cinnamon stick is curled bark. They do not shine like gold. They cannot feed an army or be forged into weapons. Yet these small fragments commanded the attention of kings and bankers. The modern age began with machines and gunpowder, yes, but it also began with a visceral, organized human hunger for distant tastes and prestige. To understand how they gained that power, we have to start in the humid tropical ecosystems where they grow. The sharp heat of pepper or the bitter sting of cloves weren't created for human pleasure. Plants evolved these specific compounds entirely as chemical defenses to ward off insects and survive in highly competitive environments. When early human populations interacted with these plants, they found utility in those intense chemical reactions. A compound that burned the tongue could stimulate the body. A sharp-smelling bark could help preserve food in a hot climate. Over time, this practical use developed into sophisticated systems of healing. In ancient India, traditions that would later be codified into Ayurvedic medicine mapped these specific plant compounds to bodily functions. Flavor became a way of understanding health, digestion, and balance. Extracting these compounds required incredible precision. Harvesters needed generational knowledge to know exactly when a clove bud should be picked before it opened, or exactly how to peel the inner bark of a cinnamon tree so it would dry properly. Before a merchant slapped a price tag on them, a spice's value was strictly derived from the intimate knowledge of the people who worked the land. The wealth lay in the knowing, long before it lay in the owning. Because these plants were localized to specific tropical pockets, like nutmeg on the Banda Islands or pepper on the Malabar coast, they became scarce luxuries the moment they left their home soil. Their potency survived the drying process, meaning a small, lightweight sack could hold the wealth of a small estate. This map shows how they moved. Radiating from South and Southeast Asia, pathways carried spices alongside silk. Sailors rode the monsoon winds, treating the Indian Ocean as a seasonal road. As routes converged, spices integrated into Islamic medicine and courtly cuisines, connecting diverse communities. They also crossed into the metaphysical. Ancient empires incorporated these imported aromatics into their highest spiritual rituals. Scent, rising as smoke in temples and tombs, was used to mark the strict boundary between mortal life and the divine presence. A local plant defense mechanism had become a cultural signifier. Spices defined the edges of religious practice, medical science, and imperial reach. By the time a sack of pepper or a bundle of cinnamon reached Europe, it had passed through so many hands that its true geographic origin was completely obscured. Middlemen intentionally encouraged wild myths, like cinnamon being guarded by giant birds, to keep the supply mysterious and inflate the price. Because the cost was so astronomical, spices became a tool for social theater. Elite European banquets used heavy seasoning as a display of wealth. Serving a heavily spiced dish was a silent, powerful way to prove that a household's geopolitical reach extended beyond the known horizon. Geography created a massive economic bottleneck. Venice positioned itself at the nexus of the Mediterranean. By standing between European demand and Eastern supply lines, Venice accumulated staggering wealth. This choke point generated intense friction. Rival kingdoms were locked out, paying exorbitant markups. This combination proved highly volatile. You had an extreme desire for a luxury good, a massive geographic distance separating the buyer from the source, and a deep resentment against the middlemen controlling the flow. To bypass those Mediterranean choke points, Western European states began to look southward. They financed experimental, high-risk maritime expeditions down the African coast, testing out a grand strategy to reach the Indian Ocean entirely by sea. When Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama finally reached India in 1498, it was not a peaceful discovery of an empty frontier. He sailed directly into a mature, sophisticated, and highly organized trading system that had functioned for centuries without European involvement. The Portuguese quickly realized they had almost nothing of value to trade. Their goods were completely unimpressive to Indian merchants, so they compensated for their lack of commercial leverage by deploying cannon-armed ships to blast their way into the market. The Portuguese shifted the rules of the ocean from negotiation to armed extraction. Instead of competing as merchants, they used their naval strength to issue mandatory trade passes and seize the cargo of anyone who refused to pay. They stopped seeking a share of the trade and began demanding ownership of the route. The escalation reached its peak in the generations that followed. Corporations like the Dutch East India Company arrived in Southeast Asia and viewed specific spices like nutmeg and mace purely as monopolies they were willing to enforce through mass violence. It is a dark paradox. Seeds and bark that were harvested to bring warmth, flavor, and fragrance into human life directly funded colonial forced labor, deportations, and the violent destruction of entire island communities. Inside these tiny seeds is the story of how organized desire turned fragrance into currency, and that currency into a global system of conquest. They are evidence of what had to move, who had to labor, and who had to disappear for that scent to arrive in your hand. To sail the Indian Ocean centuries ago was to submit to a calendar written in wind. The seasonal monsoons allowed heavy wooden ships to cross vast waters long before modern engines existed. This weather pattern sustained a living chain of human trade, stretching across deserts and seas. Pepper and cinnamon did not travel from tropical groves directly to European dining tables. They moved in slow, deliberate stages. A basket of pepper harvested on the Malabar coast passed through local brokers, port warehouses, money changers, and foreign sailors. With every port crossed and every tax paid, the spices gathered value and mystery. Eventually, those shipments reached the eastern Mediterranean, where Venetian merchants waited in candlelit counting houses. Here, a physical plant became cargo became inventory, and inventory became credit. The Venetians had mastered the art of turning a sensory experience into abstract numbers on a ledger. That financial abstraction translated into fleets, treaties, and immense wealth. Venice proved to the rest of Europe exactly what access could produce. They demonstrated that controlling the transit of distant nature could generate extraordinary political power. The Portuguese watched Venetian prosperity from the edge of the Atlantic and decided to bypass the Mediterranean entirely. When Vasco da Gama navigated around Africa to reach India in 1498, he brought trade goods that barely interested local merchants. But he also brought heavily armed ships and a royal mandate to seize control of the trade at its source. Looking at the trade routes on this map, the Portuguese strategy is clear. Rather than trying to conquer deeply populated inland territories, they built an empire of maritime choke points. They targeted strategic coastal straits and harbor mouths, places like Goa and Malacca, where ocean traffic was forced into narrow channels. Once they controlled these bottlenecks, they introduced the carcaz, a mandatory pass system. Portuguese ships used naval cannons to force existing merchants to pay for the right to sail their own waters. Violence became a commercial tool to extract wealth from routes that had thrived freely for centuries. This map shows a vertical line dividing the ocean, a result of the race to claim direct sea routes to Asia. Treaties sliced through oceans and continents, dividing up lands already inhabited by others. Columbus sailed west searching for these same spice markets, initiating the colonization of the Americas. The Portuguese proved global commerce could be forcibly redirected through state-sanctioned naval violence. They rewrote the rules of maritime engagement, setting a blueprint that rival nations would soon escalate. The entire mechanism of this trade relied on two biological traits of the plants themselves. First, chemical concentration. Plants evolved potent defense compounds that humans experience as intense flavor or heat, meaning a tiny pinch could transform a whole meal. Second, durability. When dried, a seed or strip of bark can survive a sea journey lasting months without rotting. But durability alone doesn't create high prices. The real driver was geographical scarcity. The world's entire supply of true nutmeg grew exclusively in the tiny volcanic Banda Islands, while cloves were confined to the Maluku Islands. They required a specific, remote ecosystem to grow. Buyers were paying for the accumulated distance. The price covered shipwrecks, heavy transit taxes, and the physical danger required to move a seed halfway across the planet. By the time it reached Europe, the spice contained the cost of its journey. That geographical bottleneck created a fatal vulnerability. Because these desired crops grew in such isolated, concentrated locations, European states realized it was theoretically possible to own the entire global supply. In 1602, the Dutch invented a new kind of institution to seize that supply. The Dutch East India Company, or VOC, was a state-backed corporation that fused private investment with the legal authority to maintain armies, build forts, and wage war. It was a trading venture with the legal personality of an empire. This Dutch stock document from 1602 shows the financial backing behind this ambition. You can see the signatures and numbers representing the private investors who demanded returns. To satisfy them, the VOC intended to dictate the global market by controlling the living trees in the Banda and Maluku Islands. A monopoly cannot tolerate a free market. If an independent islander sells nutmeg to an Arab or Javanese merchant, the global price drops. To maintain exclusive control and high margins, the Dutch realized they had to destroy the economic independence of the local communities. The company operated with constant paranoia. They dispatched patrols to chop down unauthorized spice trees outside their designated zones. They punished anyone caught smuggling seeds. They engineered an artificial scarcity, ensuring the supply always stayed slightly below European demand. The corporate demand for total market control turned a network of ancient trade into a massive, organized system of domination over living ecosystems and the people who tended them. When the Bandanese people refused to submit to exclusive contracts, the response was merciless. In 1621, Governor-General Jan Pieterszoon Koon launched a military campaign against the islands to crush resistance and secure the monopoly. This colonial map shows how a living society was reduced to a company asset. After killing or deporting the original inhabitants, the Dutch carved the landscape into neat plantations called perken and imported enslaved laborers to harvest the nutmeg. The suffering radiated outward across the supply chain. It reached the damp confines below deck, where underpaid sailors battled scurvy and fever for months at sea. It extended to the docks, where local porters and warehouse workers moved cargo through heat and darkness under the crushing weight of company cargo. It also caused deep cultural erasure. As indigenous populations were displaced or killed, generational ecological knowledge, local rituals, and entire languages vanished. The plants survived to be exported, but the communities that had given those plants meaning were erased. Thousands of miles away, European consumers grated fresh nutmeg into their winter drinks and baked cloves into sweet pastries. The geographical distance of the supply chain protected their moral comfort, allowing them to taste status and luxury without seeing the blood required to deliver it. This is the dark machine of early global commerce. It took a simple human desire for flavor and converted it into rigid rules. It turned those rules into organized violence and then processed that violence into justifiable profit for shareholders. This company ledger shows how human lives were abstracted into ink. Bureaucracy allowed company directors to track shipments, prices, and labor costs, while completely removing the human toll from the page. Suffering was organized into administrative data. The formal spice monopolies eventually collapsed, but the institutional blueprint they perfected survived. The practice of reorganizing distant land, labor, and ecology to satisfy foreign markets became the foundation for how our global economy operates today. When you look at an ordinary spice jar sitting in a kitchen cabinet, you are looking at the descendant of that system. It offers a quiet warning. The most destructive forces in civilization do not always begin with ideological hatred. Sometimes they begin simply because we have an appetite. On paper, an empire can draw lines around oceans. A governor can sign a treaty and mail it back to Europe as proof that perfect commercial order has been achieved. But the world is never only paper. The ocean is hostile, and it is full of people, and people push back. Early imperial monopolies faced constant friction. In the Indian Ocean, Portuguese and Dutch fleets tried to flatten highly competitive, adaptive trade networks into total obedience. In response, local rulers negotiated alliances when useful and fought when necessary. Gujarati traders learned to evade patrols. The people of Banda, facing catastrophic displacement and violence, held on to the memory of their homeland. People survived by refusing to forget their old partners and by keeping their harvests out of company ledgers. The natural world resisted too. Plants became accomplices against the companies in a process of botanical escape. You can guard a grove of nutmeg, but you cannot easily control a bird carrying a seed. Sailors smuggled cuttings. Rival powers sponsored botanical theft, like the French successfully transplanting cloves to Mauritius. To a chartered company, carrying a few seeds across a border was theft. To the people trapped by these monopolies, it was survival. These acts of smuggling and secret cultivation prevented distant empires from completely owning the natural world. Living things and human knowledge always found a way to leak through the borders. Eventually, the medieval aura surrounding spices began to fade. As European ships multiplied across oceans, mapping improved and botanical intelligence expanded. People realized cinnamon was not guarded by mythical birds at the edge of the world. It was a crop with a specific source and a predictable supply chain. When the unknown becomes mapped and measured, the geopolitical price drops. Then, in 1492, Europeans reached the Americas and triggered the Columbian Exchange, the massive, rapid transfer of plants and cultures across the Atlantic. They didn't find the Asian islands they were looking for, but they found the chili pepper. Chilies were incredibly easy to grow in diverse climates. They democratized heat. A family could now grow a fire in their own backyard, completely breaking the old elite reliance on expensive imported black pepper. At the same time, Caribbean and Brazilian plantations were mass-producing sugar. As sugar flooded the market, spices physically moved away from the center of savory aristocratic feasts. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger found a new home in sweet baking, puddings, and festive domestic comfort foods. The spice race achieved its original goal. Europe secured the routes. But this success functioned as a dark rehearsal. The techniques learned in the spice world, armed trade, chartered companies, and plantation control, provided a structural template for the massive extraction systems that would soon define tea, cotton, and rubber. In the 19th century, the mechanics of global travel shifted. Steamships, railways, and the opening of the Suez Canal compressed global time. Merchants no longer waited months on unpredictable monsoon winds. The perilous, highly visible adventure of the spice trade was replaced by a fast, mechanical, predictable supply chain. Inside the factories, large-scale industrial processors began grinding, blending, and drying these imports. Whole peppercorns and cinnamon bark became uniform powders. Abstraction took over. The visual identity of the living plant was erased, making it difficult for a consumer to connect the dust in a jar to a tree in a distant forest. This era also formalized the science of empire. Institutions emerged to categorize and control economic crops. Where can we transplant this crop? How to break a rival's monopoly? How to maximize colonial profit? Science mapped the natural world so the empire could harvest it. Global markets demanded massive volume, and volume demanded incredibly cheap labor. Industrialization did not eliminate the coercion of the old spice routes. It simply optimized it, hiding the physical exploitation of farmers and laborers behind a thick wall of corporate logistics and standardized production. Spices steadily moved down the social ladder into the respectable middle-class home. Companies used packaging to build trust, replacing the violent history of the plantations with safe, nostalgic illustrations. The smell of cloves and nutmeg became permanently tied to childhood, holidays, and domestic comfort. Commercial food manufacturers saw an opportunity to scale this comfort. They developed products like British curry powder, an imperial invention designed to flatten the vast, living complexity of South Asian cuisine into a single shelf-stable tin. A massive cultural tradition was simplified for the convenience of the colonial kitchen. But ordinary people were also using these newly accessible ingredients to survive. Migrant communities carried their spice blends into new, unfamiliar cities. a familiar scent in an apartment hallway, or a specific mixture in a restaurant kitchen became a way to preserve cultural memory, language, and belonging far from home. Across the world, cooks maintained a complex grammar of flavor, knowing the exact second garlic is about to burn, or blooming mustard seeds in a pan of hot oil. And these deep, intimate rituals absorbed the global supply chain completely. And this creates a profound erasure. We make commodities meaningful by using them, but the more deeply we love an ingredient, and the more natural it feels in our grandmother's recipe, the more thoroughly we forget the distant, often painful origin of the powder in our hands. The modern supermarket spice shelf is a masterpiece of corporate disguise. You see clean labels, calming colors, and promises of authenticity. It is an environment designed to make you feel that the global supply chain is entirely stable and frictionless. Just behind that label is immense physical vulnerability. Take vanilla from Madagascar. It requires careful, intensive hand pollination and curing. Consumers pay a premium for the extract, while the farmers who actually coax the flavor from the orchid face cyclical debt, extreme weather, and price crashes. You see the same dynamics across the shelf. Saffron requires hand harvesting thousands of delicate flower stigmas. Even common black pepper is subject to invisible price volatility and crop diseases. The consumer experiences a fixed price tag, while the producer absorbs all the chaos of the climate and the market. Today, many consumers actively look for single origin or fair trade labels, trying to reclaim some transparency. But knowing exactly which farm a crop came from does not automatically transfer financial power or leverage back to the farmer. The corporate age successfully took the brutal, muddy reality of distant agriculture and converted it into a stable lifestyle product. It captured the massive financial value of global flavor while maintaining absolute control over the story the consumer gets to read. This is the paradox we have to hold. The global spice trade made human civilization infinitely richer in taste, medicine, and cultural connection, and it simultaneously made the world poorer, built on stolen land, coercive labor, and broken communities. The sanitized history of the spice jar established a relationship between consumer and producer that still defines global trade. It created a world where we can be intimately familiar with a flavor or a luxury, while remaining geographically and morally distanced from the people who produce it, whether that's a smartphone or a morning coffee. Yet the beauty humans forged from these plants remains deeply real. Chili peppers adapted in Thailand, diaspora curries built in London, seasonal baking in winter kitchens. Human beings took the raw materials of an unequal system and created genuine love, comfort, and survival. Knowing this history shouldn't leave us with guilt. Guilt freezes us. It makes us look away. We need attention. When you shake pepper over a meal or smell cinnamon in a bakery, you are touching a human root older than nations. It carries the heavy weight of empire, yes, but it also carries the warmth of human survival. Look inside a typical kitchen cupboard, and you will find a jar of black pepper sitting right next to the salt. Extreme global availability has made these ingredients so cheap and so common that their physical origins remain invisible. Until a peppercorn cracks open, it is very easy to forget it was ever a seed. For decades, the modern world treated these glass jars as if their story was already finished. But recently, consumers have begun turning the jar around. They are questioning the geographic origin of the contents and looking for the colonial legacies that the Old Spice label was never designed to reveal. This rediscovery is driven by chefs and diaspora communities, people living far from their ancestral homelands. By naming specific regional dishes and techniques, they push back against flattening complex culinary traditions under vague imported categories like curry powder. Meanwhile, the modern wellness industry often extracts simplified health benefits from spices to market them to wealthy buyers. This process treats ingredients like turmeric or cinnamon as isolated compounds, often ignoring the traditional knowledge systems and the people who maintained these plants for centuries. Asking questions about where a spice comes from is a necessary first step, but unless the economic power dynamics actually shift, an ethical or decolonial label is just another luxury marketing feature. If the farmers remain trapped in a cycle of poverty, the branding fails to change the history it claims to honor. The threats facing the spice trade today do not look like the galleons and cannons of the 17th century. The current crisis is a destabilized climate. Many of these high-value aromatics require specific ecological conditions, and shifting weather patterns now threaten the plants themselves. Take vanilla, for example. In major producing regions like Madagascar, these vines require labor-intensive hand pollination and months of careful curing. This unmechanized work is uniquely vulnerable. A single cyclone or an irregular rainy season can destroy years of growth, devastating the grower's livelihood. We see similar pressures in the saffron trade. Geopolitical instability and the demand for low-cost luxury force intense labor conditions onto workers. They spend hours in foggy fields, pulling delicate stigmas from thousands of flowers by hand for a wage that rarely reflects the retail value. This animated graph tracking global black pepper supply shows how market volatility acts as a trap. High prices encourage a spike in planting, which eventually floods the market and triggers a price crash. Wealthy middlemen can often absorb these shocks, while smallholder farmers are left with the debt of a failed harvest. The central injustice of the modern supply chain is a matter of pure math. The people standing in the soil, who bear the highest ecological risks and the most severe economic instability, routinely receive the smallest possible share of the profits. Getting a product from that soil to a supermarket requires a massive, fragmented logistical machine. A single clove might pass through local collectors, regional traders, chemical processors, and international exporters before a consumer ever touches it. Industrial container ships have superseded the mechanics of the traditional caravan. Goods move across oceans at a staggering scale, managed by an infrastructure of standardized logistics that renders the physical journey invisible to the end user. A significant percentage of these plants bypass the consumer entirely. Millions of tons of spices vanish into an invisible market, where they are ground into extracts or oleoresins to create engineered, uniform flavor profiles for industrial food manufacturing. This creates a new kind of control through intellectual property. Corporations now patent specific chemical flavor formulations. They isolate a marketable taste and trademark it, detaching the final product from the culture or the ecology that originally produced it. Historically, maritime empires built forts to dominate physical trade routes. Today, power lies in the control of flavor consistency. By standardizing taste through industrial formulations, the system ensures market share by providing a predictable, engineered experience that replaces the natural variability of the plant. Outside of those standardized logistics networks, an older system still thrives. Traditional spice markets around the world operate as living archives. In these stalls, spices are scooped by hand and smelled before purchase, maintaining a sensory connection that industrial packaging often erases. Across South Asia, the Middle East, and the Americas, culinary knowledge is preserved in the physical repetition of daily cooking, knowing when the oil is hot enough or pounding a pace until the aroma hits the perfect balance. This is an inheritance that does not require a ledger. For people displaced by war or migration, the scent of a blooming spice acts as a tiny archive. The warmth of cinnamon or the lift of cardamom has the power to reconstruct a sense of place when geography has been broken, bringing back the voices and kitchens of a lost home. Spices survived the violence of colonization and slavery by becoming part of new cultural languages. Marginalized communities blended indigenous, African, Asian, and European ingredients into resilient survival systems, creating enduring traditions like jerk, adobo, and curry. A colonial company could seize a harbor and force a contract onto a community, but spices outlasted those empires because the human relationship with the plant, the memory and the love attached to it, could never be fully owned by a corporate monopoly. That tiny spice jar sitting on the kitchen counter operates as a mirror. It reveals how easily modern civilization hides massive supply chains, the food, the labor, and the environmental cost, inside small, everyday objects. This separation between the consumer and the producer is not a modern invention. It was inherited from early corporate empires that abstracted human labor and suffering into neat, bureaucratic paperwork. This history challenges the concept of discovery. European powers did not find spices waiting in silence. They used naval force to seize advantage in a world of trade networks and knowledge systems that were already ancient. Knowing the dark history of the spice route should not ruin the pleasure of food. Instead, it allows that pleasure to be rooted in an honest relationship with the past. It gives the beauty of the flavor a necessary weight. Consumers possess the agency to consciously interrupt this pattern. By asking about origin and respecting cultural context, we can refuse the illusion of innocence that global markets attempt to sell us. If you strip away the history of the fleets and the companies, you are left with the beginning, a physical plant growing in the soil. Before empire, there was only the fragrance and the farmer. The hunger for direct access to these tiny plants unleashed a commercial violence that reshaped the globe. It pushed ships around the Cape of Good Hope and brought cannon into the Indian Ocean. As shipping industrialized and prices fell, once rare treasures became mundane staples. This transition into the ordinary is what makes the history difficult to see. Their constant presence in our kitchens serves as a mask for the systems that brought them there. The point is to restore the missing world around the jar, to see the farmer as well as the feast. We must learn to hold both the brutal history of empire and the beautiful resilience of culture at the same time. The spice jar is small enough to ignore, but large enough to reveal the shape of the modern age. It forces us to look in the mirror and ask, what are human beings willing to do for the things they desire?